It is so rainy outside, and so I really just wanted to get really cozy. What a perfect day to film. It's still light out, it's still warm, but it's overcast and it's rainy. Just came back from my workout, had my coffee, so I'm feeling good. I want to sit down and talk about books. What's not feeling good are my bangs, which is why they are clipped back in this kind of like, from the front looks like kind of like a 1920s style, and then from the back looks very 90s, early 2000s. So I look much cuter in person, I think, than I look on the camera. That's just usual anyway. I always look cuter in person. But hi, if you're new here, my name is Catherine, and I'm here to talk about books. Today is my May wrap-up, so these are all the books that I have read in the month of May. I read 4 books, which was pretty good, considering I feel like I've just gotten busier. I feel like as these months go on, I'm just getting busier and busier. I've taken on 2 theater projects. I'm going out more because the city, Chicago especially, just comes alive in the summer. Everyone's like, it's warm, patio, must go. So everybody spreads out and like wants to do things on the weekends. So I feel like I've just gotten busier. So the fact I read 4 books, feeling good. Feeling very good about that. They're not very big books, but they are great books. I read some really great stuff this past month, and I'm excited to talk about them. So come in, sit down, have a snack. The first one that I finished was a 5-star read. This was a brilliant book. It's In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is one of the books I talked about in my like yearly TBR video, because I was like, I just have a feeling I want to read this. Like, I really want to pick this up. I've heard nothing but good things, so I was like, I think it's time. And I am so glad I read this. This was really excellent. I love memoirs. And this is a memoir. So this is a memoir. Carmen Maria Machado is a writer. You might know her from her, I believe it's a short story collection called Her Body and Other, wait, what is that book called? Oh yes, Her Body and Other Parties, and it is a short story collection. I have not read that, but again, I heard so much good stuff about this one, and I loved it. So this is about Carmen Maria Machado. It's a memoir. She starts dating this woman, and this woman, so Carmen Maria Machado is living in Iowa. She's doing her master's program there, and she meets that woman there. And they start to date, and the woman like tries, because she's also a writer, tries to get into this writing program in Iowa, but she winds up getting into one in Indiana. So they have a long distance relationship, driving across Ohio through Illinois to get to Indiana, which that's a trek. It's a long stretch of flat prairie land. So they do a long distance relationship, and what starts off as like a very loving, very passionate relationship devolves into, unfortunately, a very verbally abusive, very scary relationship. The unnamed person in the relationship is committing the abuse against Carmen Maria Machado. And the way she writes this memoir, because it could just be a standard like, yep, here's me before we meet, we have the relationship, it's over. It's told through this lens of the dream house being like the relationship, and she's kind of using the relationship as this house metaphor, and then examining that through all these different lenses, including dream house as rapture, dream house as the wrong lesson, dream house as warning, dream house as idiom. Almost in different genres, but just through different lenses, because it's even more specific than genres. It's not like just doing like erotica, western. It's like fragmented memories or fragmented thoughts of her thinking back on this relationship through these different lenses and through the metaphor of the dream house. And I just thought that was brilliant. I have never seen anybody write anything like this before, even in novel form. Like, this is just, I've never seen it before. So to me, it felt so fresh, so original, and it was, I think, in a way, like a great way to tell her story. It seemed like, because a lot of this book is also in second person, so that I think gives it a little bit of a distance. Maybe she did that for her own sake. Maybe she was like, obviously she's talking about something that was traumatic and was very personal to her. So she's using the second person to kind of be like, to be able to write about this as honestly as I can, maybe I have to do second person. But it was effective, because it then also it's saying you said this is what she said to you. It puts you in it. So then you're like, oh, this is what it would feel like if I was in an increasingly unstable scary relationship. So that I thought was very effective. I knew from the get-go, like I knew this was a relationship that goes sour. I know that from the beginning. That is literally the premise of the book. It's not like I don't know what I'm getting into, but it's the fact that she like wrote the beginning so well. The beginning of the relationship, I was like, oh, this is lovely. Like they really cherish each other. They really love each other. Do they move in together and like start to move things a little quickly? Maybe, but that could be just personal taste. But like she starts it off so beautifully that you're lulled into a false sense of security of like, ah, oh, how nice. Like, oh, and then I'm like, oh, because then the descent as she writes, as it gets, you know, more and more abusive, it is done so well that I was then engaged. Because again, this is one of those books where I'm like, I kind of know where this ends. I know that she is in this relationship for a couple months and it's really bad and toxic, and then she leaves it eventually. So it's one of those books where you know that that's what the culmination is, but the journey of going through it, because this is written in such a unique way, it made it so fresh and so interesting. It was done beautifully. And there were things that were brought up in here. If ever you were to write like a master's thesis or maybe a dissertation on like the function of house in literature, I would think, I mean, I guess not fiction, but if in just writing, this could be used as such cool source material because of how she goes into talking about houses as a structure, about the house itself that they lived in when she would like go to visit her and be with her in Indiana. It's so interesting because the writing style is so cohesive. It still feels like her voice. It doesn't feel very fragmented and like, oh, this felt like a different person wrote this and I'm confused. No. It felt like very, very cohesive, but that she was able to filter everything and tweak everything so minutely to fit whatever that lens was that she was, you know, explaining this memory through. Was just so brilliant. I would love, if I ever get to, hear her talk, or like if I find some kind of podcast or speech or thing where she talks about the process of writing this book, I would love to find it. If I do find anything, I'll put it in the description box, because I just want to know how she wrote this. I want to know how she approached this, how she tackled it, what inspired her to do this. There's an overture, which as a theater person, I'm like, oh, that's great. Just like two, 3 sentences. I did read the acknowledgements, which, you know, if I read the acknowledgements, that means I really loved the book, because usually I'm like, yeah, she thanks people. But I was just like, I want to know if that maybe gives me any clue in how she wrote this. This was so good. If you don't like memoirs, or you're like bored of memoirs, so like it's the same spiel every time, just try this one, please. I also just think it's incredibly important to discuss this, because and she acknowledges this in the book too, I don't know if I've like come across many stories, whether it's in books, whether it's in movies, TV, where same-sex abusive relationships are discussed. I really don't see that often. I think that there's an emphasis on like, we just want to be able to have rights as a couple, so we have to make sure that we promote the best image of ourselves as we possibly can. It's all love, we love each other, and obviously that is the case for so many couples. But then also, because it's a relationship of people, it could unfortunately go that way, that I'm sure there are people, many people, who've picked this up and gone, I've experienced the same exact thing. I had a girlfriend, I had a boyfriend, I had a partner who was abusive like this, and it's so refreshing to see that it's a same-sex couple who's going through maybe the same thing I did. And she acknowledges this. She was like, finding like source materials talking about abusive same-sex relationships was really hard to find. Like there's very few and far between articles, source material. And so this becomes some of the source material for future writers and for future consumers. I think it's a very important thing to talk about, because at the end of the day, these are human relationships, and regardless of gender, regardless of orientation, people are people, and that means they're beautiful, and that also means they're fraught, and it means these relationships can be fraught, because the verbal abuse she experienced was frightening. This girlfriend, she never names her, but this girlfriend, you can tell, was just incredibly unstable, was raised in like a very unstable household, because they go to visit her family, and you're like, oh, I see. I see where that's coming from. And you just feel so badly for Carmen, because she's trying to work through it. The good, when it's good, is really good, and then The rest is like, she's just trying to figure out what to do. But luckily she had enough of a support system and other people in her life who were like, you need to leave it. Like, this, it's time to go. Which is why it's important to keep your friends. Keep your friends, keep your family close when you are in a relationship, because an abuser would love to isolate you, but if you are not isolated, if you have a network, they will help you through it. And this just showed, this is just another example of how hard it can be to leave in an abusive relationship. So I thought this was so unbelievably excellent, so well written, so fresh, so creative, devastating. I hate to say compulsive. Sort of like when I read I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I was like, I can't stop reading, this is so good. And then I'm like, I'm reading about this child's trauma. It's similar here where I'm like, she went through something horrible, but I couldn't put it down. So this is compulsive. Respectfully compulsive, I will say. And it was just so good. Here, take it. So I will definitely be reading more when she comes out with anything else. I'm definitely gonna read her short story collection now for sure, and anything else she writes, I am putting it on. She comes to Chicago, I'm looking for events, because I would love to hear her talk about this book if she is still wanting to talk about this book. I want to hear her talk about it. It was so good. I picked up a book that she edited, which might be in a future book haul video, maybe, because I saw that it was a book that I've been wanting for a while and it had her as the editor, and I went, you come on with me. That's it. Next is a book actually I discussed that I was currently reading in my Classics I Haven't Gotten To video. It's The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This was delightful, and that is something I don't always get to say with my reads. I read a lot of like, and this is because just what I'm drawn to. I'm drawn to very like heady books, very heavy books. Heady and heavy. Do you mind? A cat wants to come in. Give me a sec. Come here, cat. Are you in or are you out? What do you want? If you have a cat, you know, they like will want to come in. You bring them in and you close the door and they're like, no, I don't want to stay in here. And you're like, oh, you do want to join me. I don't often get to, there you are. I don't get to read a lot of just like, and that's silly to say I don't get to read because it's all based on choice, but I'm just drawn to more just like darker reads, darker books. And so I don't usually pick up something that's so like light and beautiful. But I have been wanting to read this for a long time. I loved watching the 1993 Warner Brothers movie. I used to watch it at my grandmother's house and I loved it. So I always knew the story and I grew up with the story, but I never read the book. I just never got to it. I don't think we even had a copy in my house. So I was finally like, you know what? I found this at a library book sale and I went, I'm gonna just read this book. And I am so happy I did. Gorgeous. And this felt very comforting because I knew the story. I've known these characters. And there were things I forgot about this story, so I was going back into it going, oh yes, I remember you, and this feels very comfortable and very familiar. And then, oh right, I forgot about that. I forgot about the robin and the gardener, but it was a beautiful story. So if you don't know the story, we're in like 1911. Mary Lennox was living in India with her family. I believe her father's like a captain or someone kind of high up in the army. But he and the whole family, basically the whole household, passes away from a cholera epidemic, and she's the last one left, and she has basically no one left in India. The only living relation she has is this uncle in the Yorkshire moors, and so they basically go, pack her up, and we're sending her back to England to go live with this uncle, because she's 9 years old, she can't really live by herself, so she becomes this ward of this uncle. And she's a miserable child, like miserable child. She was very spoiled by her nurses in India. Her parents really didn't give her the time of day, so she was incredibly spoiled, incredibly sad, and incredibly lonely and very angry as a result. So she gets to this house and the whole staff and also the uncle, who isn't super present, are all kind of like, all right, like this kid. And so she's left to kind of just like wander the house and also wander the grounds. They basically send her outside every day. But while she's outside, she starts to connect more with nature. She starts to like to be outside. She gains her strength and she finds a secret garden, a garden that's been locked up for 10 years. No one's allowed to go in it. The key is buried, but she finds the key and she goes into the garden and she starts to bring the garden to life. And she finds that she really gets a lot of enjoyment out of that. And from that, she really grows. She becomes a person who is kinder to people, more conscientious of people, is just a brighter, happier soul. And on the way, she meets one of the servants' brothers, whose name is Dickon. He's about her age. He is really like the soul of the Yorkshire moors. Like, he's this kid that like is always outside. He can really talk and communicate with animals. He can grow anything. He's just like, he lives in the natural world all the time. And so they become friends and start to build up this garden kind of in secret. And she also finds, spoiler alert, she finds her cousin who's living inside the house as well. They were kept apart. He was kind of kept as a secret because he's kind of like an invalid, sickly child. She finds him and they become friends, and she also was like, well, why don't we bring you outside? Like, why don't we bring you to the garden and it might make you better? And it does. It does! The healing powers of the garden. And it's just delightful. Like, this was so lovely. I loved it too because it was a children's book, and I'm not really drawn to reading children's books or like middle grade books. Because I'm like, the writing style is definitely usually geared for younger readers, and it doesn't give me it doesn't scratch the same itch I need from a book that will challenge me or that will be a little bit more complex. But I was pleasantly surprised that, yes, this is written for children, but it did feel very universal in that, yes, obviously the writing is, like, this isn't, you know, Tolstoy. It's not like I'm like, or Dostoevsky, and it's like very dense. Yes, it was obviously a little bit more simplistic, but it wasn't to the point that I was bored or that I felt pandered to or that I was like, like this is just for kids. It wasn't the equivalent of like watching Cocomelon. I would say it was probably like the equivalent of watching like Bluey, if we're putting it in TV terms, where I'm like, oh, I actually got something from that because it's written with such depth, it's written with such feeling. She probably, I mean, I don't know too much about the inspiration for this book or the writing of this book, but I imagine she wrote it just kind of as like, it's for kids, but it's for everybody, like whoever wants to read it. So I would recommend this to anyone. I would recommend this to anybody who does love to garden, who does love to be outside, who wants a lighter Yorkshire moor's tale that's not Wuthering Heights. This was not Wuthering Heights. This was a much more hopeful, loving relationship with the moors. I can tell Frances Hodgson Burnett like maybe spent time there or lived there. Like I could tell she actually really loved it. The Yorkshire dialect is written in here really well. I love that dialect. I like listen to it. I will not do it. I will absolutely not do it on this channel. Don't ask me. I would butcher it. As I was reading this, I would like listen to YouTube like videos of people speaking in it, and I was like, oh, it just sounds so good. And it was written very well in the book. I would find that as a kid to be a little challenging. Like I think if I was reading this as a child, I'd really have to like sound it out. But other than that, like I should have read this as a kid. I think when I was in like 4th, 5th grade, I would have really like really loved this. I think like maybe a deeper thing of this book is maybe Frances Hodgson Burnett saying like the English somehow along the way have kind of lost their sense of nature or lost touch with nature. In India, she kind of talks about being in nature, and she talks about like just putting together a loose garden of just like, she basically is just playing in the dirt and puts a flower in it, which means she always had kind of an intrinsic pull to be gardening or to be in nature. But she also like repeatedly says like, it was so hot I didn't want to go outside, or I was just like so tired I like didn't want to go outside. And there's something to be said about Colin, the cousin, being like locked up away and the doctors being like, no, the fresh air could kill you, like you need to stay inside and stay safe, which may have been a prevailing theory at the time, or just in some camps a prevailing theory, but she's basically, I think, making like a call to people being like, no, go outside, touch grass, like, go spend time outside, enjoy the beauty of nature, enjoy the beauty of the English countryside, like really go back and connect, because you'll feel more healthy, you'll feel renewed, you'll feel joyful. Like, I think that's really the case she's trying to make here, if there's a case being made, and it's not just like, what a lovely story. If she's trying to get you to do anything, it's like, just go breathe air, like go outside and like just enjoy the fresh air and you'll feel better. Because not only she shows the beautiful transformation of Mary as a character like really grows as she stays outside. Colin as well. Colin at the beginning is also like her, like very bratty, very spoiled, and just like a very sad child. He's heard adults say, oh, he's probably gonna die. Or he'll be a hunchback and he'll die, which you should never hear. As a kid, those adults were irresponsible. And so has that weighing on his mind, and he just sits in this closed off room, dark and brooding about that. But then as soon as he like has something to hope for and to work for, and he for a while wasn't walking, but then he learns to like really get on his legs and to walk, it just completely transforms him into this different child. And I think the last chapter of this was so beautiful in that she kind of wraps everything up with a nice ribbon, which is for a children's book, we love. Kids love when there's that little, like, we're ending the story. But there was, like, a lovely thing where she was like, Mary was very sullen and sad, and she went to here. Colin was also not walking and very sickly, and he went to here. And this can also happen with adults. And it talks about Mr. Craven, who is Colin's father, Mary's uncle, who also was like, when his wife died, he was very sad. That's why he shut up the garden. He shut himself off. He became very reclusive, not just in the house physically, but just emotionally reclusive. So she was making the case that, yes, these children are transformed, and also Mr. Craven, as an adult, has these things too. And being outside, being with these children who have been renewed by the outside will also help him. And that is just like, it's so stunning. It's so gorgeous. And to like tell kids that like adults have those problems too and can also work through things. They can be burdened by grief. They can be turned into different people, but that nature can help them. I just think that's a beautiful sentiment. Now, is it any replacement for therapy in 2024? Not necessarily, obviously, but this is, I think, a pretty progressive thing of being like, go outside in nature and it can help you. I would think for the time is pretty progressive. Now, of course, we have other things to help us, but going outside can certainly help if you're feeling gross. Just go for a walk, and it won't cure things necessarily, but it may just lift some things up. You don't know. So this made the case for that, and this was just a delightful read. It was nice to read right before bed. It was lovely. This was just lovely. Recommend. If you haven't picked this up and you just want a nice little easy read, I do recommend this. It was lovely. Secret Garden. So sweet. Then, when I finished Secret Garden, I was like, now I want to read something demented. I want something messed up. I want a complete shift, because again, I don't usually read anything that's too sweet. And so I'm like, back to business. Back to what we know. And that's a horror novel. I read The Auctioneer by Joan Sampson. Hilarious. I was just like, yeah, no, we need to move. We need to get a little weirder about it. The Auctioneer. This was a weird little book. I liked it. I was thinking I might be a little bit more scared. No, I wasn't super scared, but it was a very scary concept. So this book was written in the 70s. Joan Sampson, unfortunately, very unfortunately, passed away from cancer shortly after this book was published, which is why she hasn't written anything else. Like, this is her only novel. Had she lived, I think she would have gone on to be a really well-known writer. Because when this book first came out, people were obsessed with it. It was going to be turned into a movie, it was a bestseller, and then I think truly because she passed away, maybe there wasn't as many people, she wasn't there to advocate for her book, and maybe there weren't as many people to advocate for her book. So it slowly just like faded a bit into obscurity. It kind of went out of print. So the fact I have it in print is pretty miraculous, and I'm very happy it got back in print and that people now are like, no, this is a horror classic. We need to make sure that we preserve this. So this is the story of the Moore family. They live in Harlow, which if I deduced correctly, it's in like very rural New Hampshire, which is gorgeous country if you've ever been up there. If you ever get a chance. New Hampshire's gorgeous. They're in like very, very rural. So this takes place in the 70s. It's contemporary, but they're one of those towns where it's so small and so bucolic. It almost feels like the 40s and 50s, like how they operate, how they talk to their neighbors. The Moores live like they're farmers, and they live very simply. They chop their own wood. They pretty much have a garden. They live pretty sustainably. And again, to me, reading it, I'm like, I feel like they're in the 40s and 50s. Like, it feels like an even longer ago than it actually was, and that's kind of the point. There's an auctioneer named Pearlie Dunsmore who moves to the town, and he starts to just get people to join the police force. It's one of those places that had one sheriff, and he starts to get people to join the police force because he starts saying, well, the world's getting weird out there. It's very odd. There's crime coming in. Crime is coming into this town, which there never used to be. And he's also getting people to raise money for this new police force. He starts getting people in the town to donate their things for auction. He starts having these auctions every week of stuff from the town, but he doesn't stop. He just keeps asking for things, asking. Every Thursday he stops by, what can I take, what can I take, what can I take? And finally the Moores are like, we have nothing left to give you. Like, we gave you all of our old antiques, all of my mother's wedding dress, like we've given you everything. And the auctioneer just keeps taking, and he finally kind of seeps in and takes over the town and starts selling everything he can, and when I mean everything, it goes to an extent where I'm like, oh shoot, and starts to slowly take over this small town, because he wants to develop something. He wants to develop like a vacation homes and make it into like a vacation destination for city people. Terrifying concept. Not super relatable because I live in Chicago and this just like wouldn't ever fly in Chicago, but could this happen in a one of those super tiny towns that maybe right now doesn't have a lot of industry, doesn't have a lot of people, has a small police force? Like, it could. Like, it's one of those nightmare things where you're like, that is a little scary to think that that could happen. Like, someone charismatic enough and manipulative enough could maybe like start to take a town over. But really, like, really good. Laid out really well. Well written. I didn't love some of the characters. So there's the Moore family. There's John Moore, who's the father. Mim, his wife. Their daughter Hildy, who's 4. And then John's mother, who's just called Ma in the book, lives with them. So that's the family unit living in the house. Also important to note that the Moores, so John and his mother, their family has lived there for like 200 years. The family members must have gotten there early, built that land, and everyone has lived on that land up until then. So that plays a huge part in the book, because John and Ma are like, no, we've lived here, this is where our people are from. This is our house, we're not backing down. Whereas Mim, since she's the one who's married in, at some point is like, we need to leave. Like, we need to pack up and go because this is getting really bad. But because she's the one who hasn't lived there for generations, she's a little bit less inclined to stay. So that's an important point to note. I didn't love some of the characters. I thought John was problematic, to say the least. Probably it was on purpose to further the plot, the reason that they're not leaving. And also just to give it a kind of weird edge with the wife. There's allusions to like how they get together as a couple, and it's like, it's implied that maybe John is a little bit older than Mim, and he takes her virginity when she's like 15. And it is implied that he kind of had to convince her, which, like, that I was like, oh, okay. So it gives you this edge that, like, yeah, these are technically the heroes of the story, these are the protagonists, but they're not perfect people. And all of the men in this story just, like, had, like, a weird edge to them, even the ones that we're supposed to be siding with. I was still like, And he bordered on abusive. I think he was kind of abusive, and that kind of made me go, Also, his mother, I couldn't stand the mother. I thought she was so annoying. And that could just be a personal preference, but she, like, at first was like, this auctioneer's great, and then she was like, he's the devil, and she was super outspoken about it, which I did respect, that she was like that old lady that was like, we're not going down without a fight. Like, I did respect the gumption, but I was just like, you're not thinking about this at all. I just found her kind of annoying. The hero to me was Mim, was the wife character. She marries this guy John. I mean, it sounds like she was coerced the first time, but she marries John when she's quite young, and she's kind of like, what did I do? Like, I'm happy, and this is the life I chose, but kind of what am I doing? There was a really great sentence towards the end of the book where Joan Samson is saying, like, Mim felt like she just wanted to keep running and always wanted to keep running, but that she also felt like a deer skin tacked onto the wall of the house, because she always came back. And I was like, oh! I was like, that totally gave me insight into her, because at the beginning she's like, no, I'm happy. Underneath she was like, I really just want to run. There's also a line where Ma says, at some point, she was like, I wanted to go see the world, I wanted to go see things, but your father, John, said to me, like, look around you, this is all we need. Like, to the farm, this is all we need. And then she never left. There was something about, like, keeping women in these, like, traditional roles and in these traditional homes when they wanted to be free, and especially in the 70s, in a time where women felt like they could maybe go do things other than that. So it had, like, a very, like, that sentiment was in there and was fascinating, played into the auctioneer, like, banking on these, like, small towns, having this, like, quaint way of life so that he can market that to city people. Like, look at these look how quaint it is here, look how bucolic and calm it is here, and he could market that. but also the women are there being like, I want to go. It was very subtle, but I found that to be really interesting. There was like very uncanny moments in this. This wasn't like, I'm scared. There's very few books I've read where I'm like, I'm actually terrified. This didn't terrify me, but there was just a lot of very like weird, uncanny scenes that were very unsettling. Like Mim goes to visit a friend of hers whose husband has joined the police force. John refuses to join the police force, which is something I respected of him because he was like, I don't like where this is going. But she goes to visit a friend whose husband has joined it, and she goes to the house and the children are very withdrawn and weird and the whole house is kind of in disarray. And her friend is like babbling on, but you can tell is really unstable and things are not going well. Like those scenes were very like, ooh. This felt also like, which this came out immediately following. I don't know how much she was in conversation with Stephen King or how much she knew. Salem's Lot came out right before this one, which I thought was really interesting because this had a very similar feeling, because Salem's Lot is also one of those like very, very tiny towns, very old way of life that's already starting to change, and a vampire comes in. And in this case, in The Auctioneer, it's not a vampire, it is a man, but he is kind of a vampire because he is sucking the town dry of all of their valuables and all of their things to try to take over. So I just thought that was interesting. Like, oh, this would almost be like a very similar double feature had this been made into any kind of film. It probably should be. I think someone could do this justice. But overall, I really enjoyed this. This was really good. It was compulsive. I was, especially towards the middle, I was like reading it. Was I in love with this? No, I don't think this isn't like a new favorite or anything, but it was really good. It had a pretty good ending, a little bit open-ended. So if you're just looking for like a good, well-written horror book, it's not pulpy at all, but like is very fun, I would pick this up. This was a good one. Again, it's such a shame that Joan Sampson is no longer with us and didn't write anything else, because I think this was really excellent. And in fact, this was her first one. You could see she would have been so, there would have been even better books. Like she would have been so good, but unfortunately, this is the one we have. So, The Auctioneer, if you can get it, if you can get your hands on it. I was so lucky to find this in a little free library, but if you can get your hands on it, I recommend. I recommend. All right, the last one is one I kind of just impulsively picked up because I've had it for years and I haven't read it. And I was finally like, you know what? I've got a couple days left in May. Let me just like squeeze in one more book, and one that has been sitting on my shelves for a while. It's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. So this is a very interesting edition. So this includes the story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. But then it includes, I believe, is it 6 other stories? Yeah, so it's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, 6 other stories, and he also writes a little introduction. So Harlan Ellison has like written a little introduction for each of the stories, kind of giving them a little bit of background or explaining things a little bit. And there's also like a essay following I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream that talks about the writing of it, kind of defending portions of it, and writing about the reception of it, all from him. And there's multiple of these, so it's the Harlan Ellison collection, so there are multiple of these editions that have separate stories and him writing about each one, which I think is really fascinating because it's a way for him to like give you the story but also have a further conversation with his audience about what is going to be read. I wasn't super into these. So these are like very science fiction, very speculative type fiction stories. And I like science fiction. If we're talking about fiction subgenres, I'm not a huge fantasy person, I'm not really a romance person, but I do like sci-fi. I tend to gravitate towards sci-fi. Like any short story collection, there were some that I was like really into, and then there were some I really wasn't into. But what kind of brought this down from like a 4-star to a 3-star for me was his voice, like was him talking as Harlan Ellison. How do I put this lightly? I didn't like him. I don't like him. The funny thing is that he probably, if he heard me ever say that, would thrive off that. Because I'm reading this, I'm like, he's coming off kind of arrogant, like especially in the introduction and in the essay following I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. I was like, he comes off like kind of a pompous, and I was like, but then he acknowledges that, so he's like aware he is, he's like one of those, and I was just like, I don't like his voice. Like, he sounds like a little bit of a As I'm reading any book, I start to like look things up. I'm like looking up Wikipedia pages on things. I'm like doing outside research as I'm reading because I'm just very curious. and I like having context. And so I like looked up his Wikipedia page, and even just like in the introductory paragraph, it was like he was known for his short stories and his like, what was the way they phrase it, and his like interpersonal feuds. And I went, huh, and then he had a whole, you know, when there's a person's bio and they have a whole section called controversies, you're in for a ride. And I went, oh, okay. And I clicked on the controversies section. He had a lot. It seemed like the man, he was just one of those where he just wanted to argue. Maybe not for just arguing's sake, but I think he was just one of those, he was just kind of a difficult personality. I mean, the pipe kind of says it all. And you know, when people are like that, that just doesn't jive with me. It just kind of irks me the wrong way. And so some of his little paragraphs at the beginning, the little introductory paragraphs before the other stories were fine, but still kind of like, okay. And just that essay following, I have no mouth, I must scream. He was like, if you're reading it wrong, you're gonna read it this way. This is what I meant by it. And I'm like, buddy, if you have to explain it, maybe you really didn't do the best job. Also, it's literature, so a lot of it's up to interpretation. I don't know. I don't know. It was him explaining himself, and I get why he would want to do that. And he was like saying, no, this is what it's supposed to be. I was like, no, I did pick up on that, but I could also see why people didn't pick up on that, because it is a little bit more vague, or it just was something that you didn't expand upon further, so some people might just skip over it. Like, I do get why people would miss that, but him being so pompous about it and being like, this... He also, at one point, like, puts down other writers, which to me always leaves kind of a bad taste in my mouth. Not that you can't put down other writers. If an author's like, I don't like the way so-and-so does this, and I think so-and-so is a hack writer, totally their opinion, but I just think it's kind of in bad taste, because everyone's different, everyone has a different way that they work through this medium, and those are your not your coworkers, no. Those are your peers, technically. I just think it's kind of in bad taste when anyone in any field kind of does that. When actors talk badly about other actors, directors talking badly about other directors, I just think it's kind of in poor taste. And he started to go down that route a little in here, and I was like, the problem I had with the book Popular Crime by Bill Bryson, a lot of that book turned into him, like, bashing true crime writers, and I was like, that's not what I came here for. And also, like, if those people are alive and they read this, that's kind of trashy. Like, that kind of sucks. Again, you're entitled to your opinions, but I just think, like, as another writer, you have a bit of a responsibility to other writers to be a bit more gracious. And just, everybody has their opinions. It doesn't mean you have to tell everybody your opinions, as I sit here on this little channel that I made expressly to express my opinions. Also, I'm not an author, so I'm like, if I don't like this author, I can say I don't like this author. Yeah, and then the stories themselves I liked, I can't say that I loved. I have to say, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, there's a reason that I think this is his most famous story. That story was very well written. It's basically about these last humans of Earth who are trapped inside this computer, and the computer is just for fun, keeps them alive, but is torturing them because this computer has, like, a hatred of humankind. That story was well done. It was very frightening and just very weird, and I think very well written. And then as the stories, like, kept going, like, as we progressed through these, I don't know, maybe if I was just getting tired of his writing style, or tired of him, to be perfectly honest, or he started strong, and then as the stories went, they get progressively less well written. That probably didn't make any sense. But I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream was certainly my favorite story. Big Sam Was My Friend was good. Eyes of Dust was good. World of the Myth. Lonely Ache I actually quite liked, and then Delusion for a Dragon Slayer and Pretty Maggie Money Eyes I did not really like. He also, like, in that essay when he was defending I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, he was like, well, because the one character in this book is there's one character in that story who is a woman, and the main character doesn't like this woman, everybody thinks that I'm a misogynist, when really, like, the man in that story says those things because the computer is making him into a misogynist. But I'm not a misogynist. I'm like, oh, lady doth protest too much, perhaps. Because then in other stories I was like, maybe it's just because these were written a while ago, or maybe he is a misogynist. I don't know, but some of the women in the other stories, I was kind of like, okay, this was written by a man. The fact he's like, I'm not a misogynist, blah, 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 like, says often misogynists if you're accused of it. I don't know. I don't know. Again, don't know. But I just think it's interesting. Yeah, this was not my favorite. I gave this 3 stars, again, because I think I Have No Mouth and I'm a Scream was incredibly strong. The other ones, I'm not really going to be thinking about them that much. They were good, not great. It's probably going to go in a little free library. If Steve doesn't want to read it, then I'm probably going to get rid of it. And I've had it, it's so funny because I've had this for so long and I've wanted to read it for so long, and now I'm finally like, yep, I did it. Yeah, but still glad I gave it a try. I don't think I'll be picking him up anytime soon. What did you think? Do you have favorite books from this month? No? Thank you for joining us, me and Eloise. We always love having you here on the channel. Comment below. Have you read any of these books? What books have you read in May? I would really like to know if you had any favorites from the month. My favorite, I would have to say, if I had to pick one, is In the Dream House. Just so unbelievably good that I kind of want to just pick it up again and just read it back over. But I am so excited for June. I've got some good books lined up. Can't wait to share them with you. Can't wait to share my next videos for the next upcoming month. I've got a big book haul coming up. Put that on your little radar. I've been collecting and amassing a lot of books since my last one. Maybe too much, considering I just don't have the room to put these books in, but I'm excited to talk about them because they're all ones that I really have been wanting to get my hands on. And then I'm gonna just have some other little videos peppered in. You know, I'm trying to upload now on Mondays, so you're probably watching this on a Monday. I think that's it. I think that's it. I need to go eat something because now I'm starting to get a little hungry. Eloise, are you hungry? Are you hungry? She's always hungry. She pretends she's starving when she has food in her bowl. Wanna go eat? Well, thank you so much for joining us. Like, comment, subscribe. Do what you want with this video. You can ignore it. You can watch it a million times, and you're a free agent. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you.